everyone. We're so pleased to have everybody here for our Smell and Taste Association of North America Book Club. My name is Pamela Silberman, and I'm one of the founders of STANA, along with Katie Boateng and Nancy Rawson, and our other founding members of the organization are Dr. Polly Joseph and Jennifer Trackman. We launched this book club really to create a space for our patient community to come together to talk about all kinds of ideas, but to really explore, new experiences and new books together. And we have an hour to delve into Nosedive, a field guide to the world's smells with Harold McGee. We're so appreciative that he's here. And we'll start with a conversation with Katie and Harold, and then we'll open it up to discussion. And a couple of things before we start, we'll just have everybody stay on mute. And once we open it up for discussion, we can come off mute and ask questions. We are recording this. We post it on our YouTube channel, and we have found that a lot of people go and view these after the fact at convenient times. And if you have any questions when we get to that point, raise your hand or come off mute, and we can jump into the discussion. I do want to go ahead and introduce Katie and Harold for anybody that's not familiar with them. Katie, as I mentioned, is a co-founder of STANA. She is an acquired anosmic who lost her sense of smell after suffering a post-viral infection in late 2008, early 2009. Katie created the Smell podcast in August of 2018 to share listener stories, scientific research, and news about the world of smell. And she launched the podcast while also serving as an undergraduate admissions counselor. Since its launch, she has hosted over 100 interviews. And in addition to her work on behalf of STANA, she's an adjunct professor, a Fifth Sense ambassador, and a member of the Patient Advocacy Committee of the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research. Harold has spent many years writing about the chemistry of food and cooking. He studied at the California Institute of Technology and at Yale University, where he wrote a doctoral thesis titled Keats and the Progress of Taste. And his deep knowledge of literature definitely came through in many of the references around in Nosedive. And for me, it further tied the smells of today with references in the past. So I appreciated those references. Books that preceded Nosedive include On Food and Cooking, The Science and Lore of the Kitchen, Keys to Good Cooking, A Guide to Making the Best Foods and Recipes, and The Curious Cook, which was also the title of the column that Harold wrote for the New York Times for many years. He's contributed reviews and original research to the scientific journal Nature and many other publications. He's a frequent speaker on food chemistry and has been a visiting lecturer at Harvard since 2010 for the course Science and Cooking from Haute Cuisine to Soft Matter Science. So it's our honor to have Harold here today to discuss Nosedive, and I'll turn it over to Katie.
Yeah, and thank you for the introductions, Pamela, and welcome, Harold. We're excited to be with you today. So to start off, can you tell us a little bit more about what motivated you to actually write this book? And secondary to that, how long did it take you to research and write it?
The second question is easier, so I'll just say 10 years, which is way longer than I had anticipated. And that's partly because the book started out as a book about flavor. So, I usually write about food and cooking. And I have always been fascinated by flavor. That's what, gives us the pleasure that we take in eating. When I started writing about food in the 1970s, we really didn't know that much about the chemical senses. And so there wasn't a whole lot to say back then. Theories about how things work, but really that was it. Come 2004, when I finished the revision of my book, I looked around and saw that there was, in fact, a lot more information about taste and smell. A Nobel Prize had just been awarded to the people who figured out the genes involved in our sense of smell. And so I thought the time was right to write a book about flavor. As I got into it, I realized that, in fact, smell was the most important and most interesting aspect of the flavor experience in general. And I just got captured by just wondering why it is that things have the smells that they do, and why there's crossover between the smells of food and drink, which we enjoy and ingest and so on, and aromas, smells in the outside world emanating from things that we would never think of putting in our mouths. So what is this class of chemicals, and what are they doing there? That's basically the question that captivated me, which then meant that I had to be thorough about it and learn about things that in the rest of the world that I knew nothing about. And so that's why it took 10 years. I knew food and cooking pretty well, the rest of the world not so much. And it was a wonderful journey.
Yeah, it definitely is a very thorough book for sure. I can see why it took you 10 years to write it. It's wonderful that you did. And it's very detailed. We were talking before we started recording that I really like the little pictures of all of the chemicals that are associated with what you're talking about. I think that's really cool. So what was the most challenging part of writing the book for you?
Well, it was learning about things that I knew nothing about in enough detail that I could actually then write about the volatile molecules associated with them and what they're doing there. So I would spend just a long time learning, for example, about the basic chemistry of the oceans, or as the book begins, the chemistry of interstellar space, because it turns out that molecules that we're familiar with here on Earth are generated in space for no good reason, except that's the nature of the chemical elements and that kind of thing. So I just had to learn about all kinds of aspects of the physical and biological worlds that I just knew nothing about. And that was a huge challenge. Sometimes I felt myself running out of steam, but I would just then switch to a different aspect and get fascinated all over again, and kept going.
Kind of an off-the-cuff question for you, but I'm really curious to know, since you've written for so long about food, how often is smell discussed in that realm? Is smell something that's often discussed when people are discussing food and drinks?
That's a really good question. And I would say that times have changed for the better. So it used to be not so much. People would, and in fact, the whole general language for talking about flavor is often confused. People talk about the taste of vanilla, for example, when it's strictly speaking an aroma and not a taste that we're enjoying. And that kind of thing used to be very common. I think it's much less common now, partly because people have just become more interested in food and drink in general. In the 70s, when I started writing, there just wasn't a whole lot of interest in the subject. Now, of course, it's a huge subject on television and streaming services. Too much to watch and to take in. And along with that general interest has come a greater specificity about what it is that we're actually enjoying when we enjoy food and drink.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for me, sometimes when I speak about not being able to taste certain things, I'm not able to perceive their flavors. And that's what I'm really meaning to say. Absolutely. So the next question I want to ask you is, your book is such an important addition to the study of smells. So when we think about our community, we have people like me who have acquired anosmia, but we also have people who were born without a sense of smell. And I'm wondering, they don't really remember what certain smells are like. So for example, wintergreen or clove, I don't really remember smells from so long ago. So do you think that we have a good vocabulary in the English language to describe smells for people who aren't familiar with scents?
No, we have a horrible vocabulary in English. That was one of the challenges of writing the book, was finding words to talk about these sensations, and it's tough. So I guess I find myself when trying to describe particular smells without simply referring to some other object in the world that has that set of volatiles, but trying to talk about the general sensation, I find myself relying on the other senses to provide some idea anyway of the impression that it gives us. So for wintergreen, for example, actually that's a really fortunately named material because it's refreshing. It's that kind of referring to that kind of physical sensation, something that's refreshing, something that's warming, something that's stimulating, irritating, all those things kind of get you, into the right ballpark, if not, to a particular sensation. But that's the best I could come up with. And I tried hard to think about it, to think whether there might be a better strategy, but I guess the English language needs to evolve in some way that I'm not capable of contributing to.
Yeah, no, that's great. So from the feedback on your book, who do you think is putting it to work the most? Or to say this another way, how do you think it's being used? So if it's being used by cooks, chefs, like sommeliers, researchers, food scientists, where else? Who's using it?
Well, I think it's mostly being used in the food and beverage related industries, because that's where I already have a set of publications, and so people knew my name from those. And I think many of the people who have been using Nosedive have been using it from that base as kind of a very large appendix to On Food and Cooking. I do know also, though, that some perfumers have been using it, because I do have a chapter about perfume, and I think they're always interested in the crossover between fragrances and other aspects of life. And it's also, to my surprise, been used by basic scientists in the realm of olfaction. I've heard from a couple of research groups that they found, in particular, the way I tried to connect the volatiles of the plant world and the animal world with the basic metabolisms of those parts of our living world. The plants and animals smell very different, and it's because they have very different ways of life. And so people in olfaction trying to teach machines how to predict, for example, the aroma, or the perception that we would have of a particular chemical structure, have found that approach useful. So it's been nice to hear that kind of thing as well. I have to say, as an author, you really don't have much idea of who's buying books unless people actually write to you, contact you, and ask questions and that kind of thing, which is a wonderful way of connecting with people. But it's just a snapshot of who all might be out there using it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's very good at describing the way that the smells work. So the next question I want to ask you is, can you share how your own personal experience with smell loss changed your thoughts about taste and smell?
Well, so there are a couple different aspects to that. One of them is actually having been anosmic occasionally myself. So the first time that I was really conscious of it was early on in writing this book about the sense of smell. And that was really scary, because I woke up one day and couldn't smell the coffee that I was grinding, and then noticed that I couldn't smell anything else, and actually got in touch with Gary Beecham at Monell, who I've known for many, many years, to say, you know, what should I do? What's going on? And he basically said, we really don't know. Hang in there. You know, sometimes it comes back, sometimes it doesn't. So fingers crossed. And happily, it did come back for me after about 6 weeks or so, 6 nerve-wracking weeks. And then that's happened a couple of times since. This first episode was long pre-COVID, but then when I got COVID, I did lose my sense of smell again. So I have at least an idea of what that can be like, and what it, you know, if you've been able to smell things and then lose the chance, what a loss that really does represent. When it comes to trying to imagine not ever having had it, that's another story. I find that very difficult to you know, begin to place myself in that position. So those are that's my experience, a couple of experiences with actually losing it. But then writing the book kind of took me in the opposite direction, of course. You know, once I decided this is a subject I'm going to write about, then I started to pay attention to all kinds of things that I never paid attention to before. And that was a huge blessing, because there is so much out there to notice, and to appreciate, and to wonder about, and to make connections, and so on. And so I'm, you know, I was very happy to be writing about food and drink for decades, but I was really glad that this idea occurred to me, because it has brought a dimension to my life that just hadn't been there before.
And another thing I'd like to know is, when you were affected by anosmia, did you notice it having any effect on your cooking or your desire to cook and make meals?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, in the first couple of days, I would work extra hard to make extra flavorful foods, hoping that that would kind of break through whatever it was that was causing my problem. And then after a while, I began to think, you know, why bother? Going out to eat really didn't make sense, except just to save myself the trouble of cooking for myself. And I love wine and tea and coffee, and you know, the very different flavors that you can get from different versions of those drinks. And that all went away. I still drank coffee and I still drank wine, but not to enjoy them. And so, yeah, it had an effect.
Yeah, huge effects on just many different areas of your life, but specifically on cooking. My own personal experience with cooking is very similar to what you just described. It becomes kind of perfunctory.
Yeah, exactly.
So while you were researching this, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the COVID time around, because I had the experience before, I did try to see whether you know, I could convince myself that it was worth the effort, and tried to find other things in foods to perceive and to enjoy apart from the smell. So I really paid much more attention to textures and to, you know, astringency and pepperiness, and the temperature of foods. I found hot food, hot soups and stews and things like that wonderful, because it was something that really did make the rest of my sensory apparatus wake up. And so it was a deficit that helped me appreciate the other aspects of food to some extent.
Makes sense, absolutely. So within your research, while you were these 10 years of going through the book, Did you come across any promising developments or future directions in the science of smells that could offer hope or possibilities for those of us who have experienced smell dysfunction?
Well, it wasn't so much through the writing of my book, but the kind of the coincidence of the later stages of writing my book with the arrival of COVID. And because I was already kind of tuned into what we knew, which wasn't much about the sense of smell, I was also pretty well attuned to how all of a sudden there was an interest in this sense, which has been so neglected over the many generations of biological science. And it still puzzles me why that's been the case. Maybe it's partly because it's really difficult to figure out. But I would say, if there's any bright side to the arrival of COVID, it's the generation of interest in the research community to understand this sense better than we do. And so far, I'm not aware that there's been huge progress. There's been, I think, progress in understanding the pathology of COVID. And I think that will eventually lead to a much better understanding of other disorders of the sense of smell. But it's still very early days, and yeah, really surprising that we don't know more than we do. It's a great mission among many for Monell to help bring us into a much clearer understanding of what's going on and ways to deal with smell disorders.
And your book was published in 2020. So which month was it published that year?
It came out in October.
Okay.
And much of the editing and argumentation with the publisher about the precise format of the book and that kind of thing, much of that happened during the pandemic when everyone was working from home. And I have to say that I was really impressed with the way that the publishers were able to coordinate. The editors and the copy editors and I were in completely different places, but they still managed to keep things on track. And the publication date had been set before COVID, and they met it despite everything. So kudos to them.
That is great. That's wonderful that they were able to stay on track like that. Another thing I want to ask you about is if you found anything to be really surprising or fascinating to you while you were researching this book that you didn't know about smell already. Were there any facts that you learned that just stood out to you as being really cool?
Endless. so many. Every chapter, because as I say, I knew food and cooking pretty well, so there weren't great surprises there. But when I decided that if I was going to do a book that tried to cover all the smells of the world that I could think of, that I would have to begin with the Big Bang, with the beginnings of everything, and then ask the question, when would molecules that we on Earth would recognize first appear in the cosmos in general? I'd have to say that was one of the big shocks to know that not just noxious things like hydrogen sulfide and ammonia and nasty things like that can be detected in outer space, but also fruity molecules, relatively complicated ones like esters, are out there. The smell of raspberry, if we were able to breathe in empty space and get a whiff of it. So that was a huge surprise. And then when it comes to the rest of the world, thinking about the basic biology of planet Earth as it developed and what it would have smelled like before plants came onto the scene, and how huge a difference the plant world has made to the smell of the world when you just walk outside. Doesn't matter whether it's a city or a forest or where, the ocean side. So getting a sense for the way that our olfactory experience has been defined by these, well, cosmic and then deep evolutionary processes was just a lot of fun to explore.
That's great. And how do you hope your book will change readers' perspectives on the sense of smell and its importance in our lives?
Well, at a very basic level, I just hope it'll bring attention to that sense and help people recognize that there's all kinds of interesting stuff out there that they may or may not be paying that much attention to, that actually tell us something about the life of the world. The processes that make the world what it is for us. So just and I tried to describe this at the very beginning, just walking down the street and sniffing and getting a whiff of a clothes dryer vent, and then somebody's just put manure on their garden, and you walk by an auto repair place and you get that. You walk by a dry cleaners and you get something different. Just so much out there to notice and to appreciate. So that's the basic idea. That's why I called it a field guide. It's not really meant to be a primer or anything like that, a treatise on the sense of smell. It's meant to be something that you can kind of dip into when you're walking down the street or going on a hike or on a cruise or wherever, and you notice something that just really catches your attention. It's a place where you can go and find out a little bit about what that smell was and what it's doing there.
Well, it's also, I think part of the reason the book is so cool is because for those who can't experience smells physically, for whatever reason, if their sense of smell isn't working, at least you can come here and you can learn more about it, like chemically, and perhaps you can imagine in a different way what it would smell like. So I think that's pretty cool. So thank you for all of your effort on describing all the different smells. It's really awesome. So my final question for you before we open it up to the rest to see if we have other questions for you is, do you have any plans in the future writing about smell?
Well, I do try to keep up with the smell literature. So post publication, people are continuing to publish papers not only on the volatile molecules in particular materials, but how it is that we're able to perceive things. And so I do try to keep current with all of that. But at the moment, my writing focus is on doing one last revision on food and cooking, which first came out in 1984 and was last revised in 2004. And so we're coming up on another couple of decades of accumulation of interest and, new ingredients being available, new ways of cooking things, new general interest and really geeky interest in things like, the details of cooking this or brewing coffee or whatever it might be. So I have a lot to catch up on for that book, but I'm keeping a dossier for the smell book, and maybe I'll have a chance to update that one as well.
Awesome. Wonderful. So at this point, we'd welcome any questions from anyone who has joined us today. If you'd like to unmute and ask Harold your question directly, you're welcome to do so. If you prefer. Yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Well, I'm so excited to hear that you are updating on food and cooking. And I also just wanted to imagine, like, how will the sense of smell in your and that research on your part influence the revision, the new edition of On Food and Cooking? And it would be, I mean, I can only imagine, delving into like retronasal olfaction and, just the whole experience of eating. I mean, if you could jam anything else into that book, into On Food and Cooking, how is your nosedive going to influence that?
Well, it's going to influence it hugely. The last couple of chapters of Nosedive are about food and drink. And so with every chapter that I'm doing in the revised On Food and Cooking, I'm going back to those chapters and extracting whatever I can that will fit into the page limit that I've been given. Often because I think it's so important to connect the science of food and cooking with people's personal experience of food and cooking. I think I can be much more particular about that now, having pulled all this stuff together for On Food for Nosedive, for particular aspects of On Food and Cooking. The problem is that there's been so much work done in food and drink and the processes of cooking. It used to be that cooking was not a respectable subject for investigation by serious scholars, whether you were in the humanities or the sciences, either one. Now, of course, it's hugely, it's almost become fashionable to study these things. And so there's a huge secondary literature that I'm trying to plow my way through and extract whatever nuggets of real insight might be there. Taste and smell will certainly be much more prominent in the revision than they were in the previous editions. But I've got lots of other stuff to cram in there as well.
So it looks like Ariel has a question. Gonna take yourself off mute, ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much. I apologize. You may hear some city noise behind me. I have a question. I know we don't have any crystal balls, but I would be kind of curious to hear your perspective on this. So I studied hotel restaurant management in college. So I have always kind of, when I experienced anosmia earlier this year, I've kind of had to like re-experience different things because color and texture now becomes so just important. So I guess, looking forward, considering with so many people who have long COVID, I mean, do you anticipate that the whole experience of like whether it's a dining experience or like a hotel stay is going to change? Because now you're not just talking about how the space smells and how the people are treating you, but you've got all these other facets. I mean, it was never really on my radar so in the forefront of my mind before.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's the case. That there are, well, I guess, to begin with, if people are going to a restaurant, then probably most of the people who are going still have an intact sense of smell, but a much larger fraction won't than would have been the case 5 or 10 years ago. And so how to how to make the experience as meaningful as possible for people who can't smell is, I think, a huge challenge. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. We have all these other sensory modalities that we just have to pull into the experience of eating to try to take the place as much as possible of, or at least make up for the deficit of not being able to smell things. And I think, textures, temperatures, colors, all these things are important. The feeling of a breeze, for example, sounds. There's this dish that Heston Blumenthal created at the restaurant The Fat Duck in the UK, which is to me a kind of it was pioneering at the time. It's now probably 20 years since he did it, and he did it for his own reasons, because he thought that trying to make the experience of eating as multisensory as possible was important, because of the way that it would help evoke memory. So he created this dish called Sound of the Sea, which involved putting headphones, whatever they are, iPods, into your ear, and then having presented to you a dish, basically a seascape. So a foam representing the waves washing up on the beach, and then breadcrumbs flavored with fish and seaweed and so on to represent the sand, and then pieces of fish and pieces of seaweed that were actually the heart of the dish. But these were all placed on a piece of glass on top of a box, and inside the box were shells and actual sand and sea creatures and that kind of thing, so that you got the sound of that environment along with a representation of that environment, along with the food from that environment. And so I think there is the opportunity for people like him and people in hotel management who can kind of bring that perspective to the whole environment of a hotel and a dining room and a room and so on, to evoke much more than just that particular place at that particular moment. So we'll see. It's going to depend on the creativity of lots of people at different levels in that business.
Thank you. And Leah has a question.
Sorry, I couldn't find the raise hand button, but
Okay.
I wanted to let you know, Harold, that about appreciating during the few years that I lost my sense of smell. I've since regained it fully, and it was before COVID. Your On Food and Cooking was a wonderful resource for me, and I found it therapeutic, literally, because what it allowed me to do, I mean, I'm in the food business, and I think a lot of my fondness and attachment and relationship with food is also intellectual. And so reading about food and really thinking hard about what drew me to it, in addition to its flavor, really helped me stay connected. And so I think it is not just the human flavor system and the other senses that can keep you cultivate your relationship with food, but you know, however your mind works. Mine happened to have worked through reading all about food that really kept me very close to it. I want to thank you just because I'm very grateful.
Well, that's wonderful for me to hear. Thank you very much. And I think you're right. I mean, I'm certainly interested in food from all angles. I started out in science. I ended up in literature. Then I ended up writing, and I do try to. I don't. It's not that I try to. It just kind of happens naturally that you know you find a passage of writing. It may just be in a magazine article about somebody noticing something in a way that strikes a chord with you and makes you realize that yes, you've had that kind of experience, or you've had an experience, but you didn't realize that it was connected to this larger web of relationships. That can make a huge difference. And that's one of the reasons I stuck with food as a subject. I wanted to teach poetry back in the day. I couldn't get a job teaching poetry, so I started writing about food, and I thought I would, you know, then go on to write about the weather or, you know, other interesting things. But food captured me because it is so varied and so connected with cultural histories, and at the same time so visceral. You know, you experience it personally. You don't have to rely on other people. And however you experience it, that's your experience. So it is this wonderful nexus of all these different levels. So,
Nancy?
Thank you. Fascinating. And I've really enjoyed dipping into the book at various points in time when I was curious about something or just wanting to read something in that area. It's just always enjoyable. But my question has to do with something that might be a little controversial, which is using artificial intelligence to help us create ways of describing the experience of smell to people that have not had it. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question, and I think I mean my maybe too facile answer is that the proof will be in the pudding. You know, we'll need to see what it is that they're able to come up with, and whether that really does help people or be appreciated by people in ways that are ordinary human attempts to translate an olfactory experience into something else can do. My sense is that humans are going to be better at that because we do have these other senses and AI doesn't. So, but then of course, AI is just going to it's going to vacuum up whatever anyone ever says or writes about it. So I guess in a way, they'll know it too. But we will have known it first. Whatever small comfort there may be in that.
The big experiment in progress.
Yeah.
Pamela?
So I had some observations when I was reading the book, and then I'll pose my question. But I was thinking, you know, as I think about the members of the STANA community, I was thinking about, you know, folks who are the congenital anosmia, that, you know, born without the sense of smell, that reading your book, on the one hand, maybe a little frustrating because they don't, you know what some of these things, some of the descriptions are, but I think it would be also helpful to know, like when you talked about like the smell of staleness, I was thinking, oh, somebody who's never smelled before and doesn't know there is there's a scent associated with it. So I did think that I would definitely want to recommend this to somebody who's got congenital anosmia. And the other group I was thinking about are all the people with parosmia. You know, a lot of it's been induced through COVID. And especially when you're getting into the coffee descriptions and then the, you know, excrement and bad descriptions, because we know that those are things that when they are smelling, right, it's coming, it's appearing to be something even, you know, worse than it is. And I was, you know, I'm a little layperson, so I was like, oh, there's got to be something in here, like understanding what the molecules are, right, that are underlying this. You know, what if you could do something to change what they're smelling? You know, so my mind was going like, there's got to be some information here that could help address. And hopefully for a lot of people, it is, you know, going away over time. But for anybody that's going to be living with it, I think there's some information in your book that could help. But my question was about you mentioned synthetic smells, like you mentioned vanilla, you know, and I was going down the road with vanilla, and you mentioned that, you know, the synthetic vanilla is different than the natural vanilla. And it sort of got me thinking, you know, what are your thoughts around that? Like, you know, in this day and age, especially in the, you know, food and fragrance industry, we do have so many synthetic, you know, created, you know, scents that we're getting away from what the original natural was. And it also made me think about, well, there could be some that are really just going extinct, right? We're destroying forests because of climate change, like those things won't grow anymore. So what are your thoughts about sort of that area, and like, what do we do to protect? I mean, you've started us by documenting it, but what do we do to like protect that and prepare for the future?
Yeah, now that's a hugely interesting aspect of all of this to me. The fact that, you know, it was perfumers in the 19th century, for the most part. I mean, there are people who were kind of clued into the chemistry of smell way earlier than that, including Paracelsus. But who showed that you could get a smell that we associate with one aspect of the living world from something else completely different. And that was a clue to the fact that, you know, it's not something that's essential to a material. It's, you know, one of many molecules that you find in that material that happens to be volatile, that gives us that impression. Anyway, so perfumers back in the 18th century were the people who figured out how to, first of all, how to isolate something like vanillin, the molecule that is the heart of vanilla flavor, and then all kinds of other things, so that they really illuminated for us the nature of flavor and the nature of aroma as they were isolating these particular things. Along with the isolation came eventually the ability to make those same molecules by other means. And on the one hand, I think that that's an amazing feat of human ingenuity, that we find something that's interesting, that we really like, and we excuse me, we find a way of duplicating it from something completely different. So instead of the vanilla bean, it's pulp waste from a paper mill. That's amazing. On the other hand, it's also kind of disturbing, because we love the smell of vanilla because it was discovered in vanilla beans, and it has this kind of rich natural history as well as human history. And we're just kind of dispensing with all of that and throwing the pulp waste molecule into our ice cream and calling it vanilla, and not really appreciating vanilla anymore. And vanilla is one of these things that is, it's not going to go extinct, but it's becoming harder and harder to grow it in healthy conditions. So I think it's a mix. You know, another example, just very quickly, from perfumery. You can make an essential oil of rose that is wonderful. But it really doesn't smell as much like a fresh rose as the synthetic version of that essential oil is, because you can pick out the molecules that don't necessarily survive the distillation process when you're making an essential oil. And so you can duplicate the fresh smell much better with synthetics than you can with the actual material. So it's complicated in really fascinating ways. And I think from my perspective, of course, what makes the most sense is to appreciate the natural material, appreciate the human ingenuity in tracking down how it is that these things are made and how else we can make them. But then when it comes to everyday life, making our choices based on some set of values that take all that into account. So, real vanilla is expensive. Real essential oil of rose is expensive. The other things are a dime a dozen. Maybe that it makes sense to go ahead if you're making ice cream for the school class, and it's 30 kids who aren't going to be paying attention anyway, fine. But if you're making it for yourself or for a set of friends, or you really want to make ice cream with 2 or 3 different kinds of vanilla, and learn about the differences, if you're able to experience that, I think that's also wonderful. So it's for me, it's a matter of awareness of the richness of the whole subject.
Are there any other questions from guests? Leah, go ahead.
It's kind of actually a question for both Harold and Nancy. And it's what the question about AI made me think of is the way in which smell is influenced by experience and memory, and is associative and subjective and not impartial. I mean, I don't know about machine learning very much to know, wouldn't that get in the way of really being able, I mean, wouldn't you have to be human and have had experiences and memory and associations to be able to have that element of the experience of smell to describe it? I mean, that's just what that made me think of. So
yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting discussion and debate, and it can only give you back what you put into it, right? So it's collecting masses of text from wherever. And now, Nosedive is part of its portfolio of data, right, that it's drawing on. But a lot of other stuff. So I think from my perspective, right now, I think what it will do is just add noise. I don't think it will add a lot of insight, but I think potentially it might be possible to do with very clever studies or prompting. It might be possible to have it really scan the words that people use in particular contexts about particular aromas and give us a body of text to work from that describes the experiences people have associated with that particular aroma, that gives us kind of a foundation to work from that would be very difficult to get any other way. But we're a ways from that, I would say.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly with that. One other aspect I would just mention is that, so I did get a I mentioned earlier, a couple of research groups got in touch with me to say that they'd found certain aspects of the book and the way I put things together useful. And one of them has gone on, and their particular interest is in being able to, on the one hand, predict what the aroma of a particular chemical structure would be. So what would be our perception of this molecule that actually doesn't exist in nature, but they've made it. The kind of proof of principle that they started out with was to try to find molecules that would be aversive to mosquito repellents, that aren't DEET or the molecules that have been in use for a long time. And DEET has toxicological problems, so there's a lot of interest in finding molecules that would be really good insect repellents. And insects are repelled by volatile molecules. So they use their AI algorithms and came up with a bunch of candidates. Their structures look nothing like DEET or the other molecules that are reasonably repellent, and they found a couple that are really, really repellent when tested on mosquitoes. So, of course, mosquitoes aren't human beings, and it may be that mosquitoes aren't really registering a smell in the way that we register a smell. It may just be a kind of more like an irritation than an actual sign of danger or something like that. But I think it does show that there are possibilities out there for identifying molecules that we haven't encountered in the world that will have interesting properties. And if the conundrum I'm faced with when I think about this is either they're going to be recognizable because they smell like something else, or they're going to be completely foreign and therefore not that interesting because they don't smell like anything else, because we just wouldn't have a context for them. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this develops. It's just one more piece of information that we're going to have about this sense that we don't really understand that well at any level, and it's going to be wonderful to see what develops.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone for all of your great questions and for joining us today. And thank you very much to you, Harold, for coming on and speaking with us about your book. I'd encourage everyone to follow you on social media. And I believe your website is curiouscook.com. Is that correct?
It's correct. It's also kind of dormant, I'm afraid, but I'll try to revive it.
Great. Well, if anyone's interested, I do see that you posted the book on there. So it's as up to date as this book. So that's good news. But thank you to everyone.
Right.
And we'll be posting this video on our YouTube channel within about a week or so. And then, it looks like Ariel, you have one last comment you'd like to make, and then we can finish the wrap up.
I guess it was more of just a curious perspective of this whole AI concept. I mean, I've come to realize that, I have my level 1 certification through the Guild of Master Sommeliers. So I already knew before I had anosmia that I had a very strong sense of smell. But what I didn't realize was how many people I surround myself with who don't spend enough time understanding the smells that they have. So, I see whether it's AI or a different form of technology, to being able to have something like a carbon monoxide alarm or a fire alarm, but something that can tell me about all sorts of other smells. If it's using AI or a different form of technology, I think it's a very interesting conversation to have. I don't, because I like that somebody said before, it's pulling information that it has access to. So I think it would be a very interesting not, I mean, obviously that's a different topic, but a very interesting opportunity for exploration. You're just pulling all of these different observations of smell and putting them into one place. I guess I was struggling to understand the fear component of it.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Ariel.
And I was just going to mention one last thing. Website reminds me that the index to the hardcover of Nosedive isn't great. And I won't say any more than that. I was able to have it fixed up for the paperback. And in order to spare my wonderful hardcover patrons from having to buy the paperback, I posted the index on my website. So, and it really is much better. So if you happen to be interested in something that you think might be in the book and you happen to have your computer nearby, that's the way to go, rather than actually using the index in the book, in the hardcover book itself.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for everyone else who came, and good luck on all of your future books. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Great to see everybody.
Thanks. This was a really interesting conversation. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Great-
much.
great.
Bye.